Hello everyone, Mr. Jones here. I am happy to be back with another video, hopefully showing you how to make things. In this video, I'm going to be making a Master Sword. I'm a huge Zelda fan. I have beat every single Zelda, all the way from Ocarina of Time up except for Majora's Mask. And I think that's kind of an anti-Zelda. I don't think that's really a Zelda game. So if you disagree with me, tell me why in the comments, try to convince me, and maybe I'll try to come and convince you. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But I started making this sword about 2 months before the game released. I was watching all the trailers and it intrigued me, so I didn't really know what was going on with the sword when I started making it. I got pretty far along making this sword before I even really knew what was going on or what it was really supposed to be about or what was going on with it. So now I know a little bit more about it, and so I'm trying to make a little adjustments here and there, but I hope you enjoy it. So let's get started.
So I started off with this graphic that I found online. Obviously there's some damage right here on the blade, though at the time of recording this I had no idea what caused it. I actually happened to have a beat up old casting that didn't go quite right lying around from a project that I was working on for another video, and the flaws in this casting look like they would lend themselves really well to recreating this sword from Tears of the Kingdom. Now I just need to find a way to measure about how much of the sword is left. So what it looks like is there's enough of this blade left to make up about 2 handle lengths. So once I get that measured out, I just want to start drawing this corroded pattern onto the blade that I have. Now I end up taking some liberties with the way things look, but I tried to stick pretty close to the design, especially since I didn't really know what had happened to the sword at this point. If I get too creative, I might actually mess something up. And voila, that's a pretty good starting point. Now to take it over to the table and chop it up with a Dremel tool. Now that I got the pencil everywhere that I want it, I'm going to quickly outline it with a marker so that I don't accidentally smudge my line away, and so that I can see what I'm cutting a little better. The Dremel tool made short work of the casting plastic. I got about halfway through chopping up the sword before my smooth brain remembered that I'd bought a new toy. I decided I would try out this new cutting bit. Whoops, I just sharpened my knife and I accidentally cut a little too much. I always wondered what was in these things. Well, now we know, and knowing's half the battle according to G.I. Joe. Anyway. This is a chuck that you can get for your Dremel tool. It makes changing the bits extremely easy. Typically it requires a small wrench that comes with your Dremel tool in order to swap out the bits. But as you can see, I did all that with my hands. You can pick one of these up at the hardware store, and I can't recommend it enough. After trying the new bit out, I really liked it. Even though the old bit was pretty decent, but this new one just went through it like it was butter. The sword needs to come to a point, so I decided to take my heat gun and soften the plastic up a little. That way I can make it more malleable and easy to shape. The next step was to prop the sword up so that the tip would cool in the right shape. Now it's time to fill this sword with a little bit of foam, that way it doesn't look hollow. That would really ruin the illusion. I'm just going to use a piece that's a little wider than what I need, and then I'll use my styrofoam cutter to trim off the excess. That's looking pretty decent. Now it's time to make the styrofoam more durable. We're going to use our Epsilon Pro. I've featured this product before in other videos. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. You just mix the A and B, and after about a minute of stirring, it's good to go. If you want more information about this product, you can check out other videos that I made about it. It actually makes a pretty decent glue, so I'm going to stir it up with this old paintbrush that came apart. That way I can glue it back together when I'm done.
Big brain.
Big brain. Big brain. This stuff can be cleaned off a brush, but it is quite difficult. It's much easier to use a disposable brush. When this stuff dries, the styrofoam will be very durable. It'll be hard, but it'll also have a little bit of a give and flex to it. That makes it more forgiving for when it gets bumped around or dropped. Alright, good as new. We'll wipe away the excess and let that dry overnight. It's the next day and it's time to check this out. Well, that's about as good as you could ask for. Now the styrofoam's nice and durable, the sword's stuck together, and all that's left is to trim it up. I'm just going to use an X-Acto knife here to trim up any of the excess epoxy or plastic that I don't want on here. We just want to give the sword a nice believable shape. Then we'll fill up any gaps with a 2-part sculpture epoxy. I've also used this product on many other videos. I'll try to leave a link in the description so that you can pick some of these things up if you so wish. I think this epoxy has at least a 30-minute work window, but it has to set overnight to fully cure. This is one of my favorite mediums to work with out of the self-drying clay style mediums. It's really pliable and elastic, and it's very durable. It's just really nice to work with, but it's a little on the pricey side. It's about $50 for a tub of the A and B epoxy that you have to mix together. Now I have filled the gaps and flaws and refined the shape. We'll use the Dremel tool to refine it further. As you can see, I'm just beveling the edges so that everything blends together really nice and smooth and seamless. I'm also using it to put in some textures. We want this Master Sword to look nice and corroded when we're done. With that done, I'll use it to sculpt in all of the corroded patterns that are on the blade. On one side, I'm trying to stay fairly true to the original design while adding in a little bit of my own style and flair. On the other side, I get a little more creative because I have not seen that side of the sword on any of the game previews at this point. Some places I'm trying to get some coarse surface texture where the sword looks damaged. Other places I'm trying to dig out really nice canals and get some pretty deep negative space in here. While some of the places are going to be relatively untouched and look kind of undamaged. Every once in a while I like to remember to stop and just step back a little and look at what I've done so far to make sure everything's still on course. Once again, I haven't seen the other side of the sword, so on this side I get to take more liberties. Now it's time to paint the sword, and for that we want to use some masking tape and mask it off. I like to buy the wide rolls, that way I can cut off the exact shape and size tape I need. That way if I need to, I can really have some really wide tape, but I can also cut off really thin slivers of tape if I need to. This gives me the most variety and control over what I'm doing. I always do the precision part with tape, and then I come back and get the large areas with some kind of paper. This saves a lot of time and money. I'm just going to close this off like it's a little packet, that way no paint can get in here. There are different ways to make this plastic look like metal, but I'm going to use this paint because the surface of this thing is so coarse and has so much texture. Now it's time to unmask it and see what we need to fix. As I expected, there were some flaws, but I'm just going to try to feather in some paint here with this brush. I can then clean it out in some turpentine just like I would any other paint. You just have to hurry before it sets. I want the melted parts of the sword to have a little grainy texture to them, so I'm going to put some of this powder that I use sometimes in the mix with my paint. I have long since beat Tears of the Kingdom, but at the time of this recording I had not yet played it. Going off of reference images I saw on the internet, it looked like a very grayish violet color, so I'm going to try to mix that up. As you guys know, red and blue make violet, and then I'm going to put in a little white and black here and there to try and put a gray tinge to it. You can also mix complementary colors together in order to get a kind of a strange gray. I probably could have gotten something very similar by mixing an alizarin crimson with some kind of viridian green. So I'm just going to give this a once over. This is going to be the first of many, many layers. I'm just going to put this violet paint anywhere I want there to look like there's significant damage. After giving it a once over to make sure I didn't miss any spots, I'm going to go ahead and start modifying my paint a little and putting on another layer. With each layer that I paint, I'm going to try to make sure that the previous layers still shine through and that I don't cover them up completely. I don't remember why, but instead of putting on the next layers, I went ahead and touched up the gold everywhere that I wanted it to have that kind of finish. Who knows the inner workings of my majestic brain? I'm sure there was a reason, and I'm sure it was brilliant. It may or may not be fun to watch depending on what kind of person you are, but I had a lot of fun painting in these little tarnished areas. It's times like this that I try to take advantage of how beat up and messed up my brushes are. Each little stray hair can make little flicks and flakes and scratches. Sporadically painting this in to make it look like damage was probably one of the more fun parts of making the sword. At least out of the paint job. Now back to my layers of gray violet. As you can see, I'm deliberately missing spots so that my old layer of paint still shines through a little. Now I do want to cover most of this layer up because it is quite a bit too dark, and it'll just work really nicely as shadows and things like that. Shadow enhancers, shall we say? Yes, yes we shall. I say, verily, verily, we shall. Indeed. That's 2 layers down. Now on to the next. Once again, I'm still trying to let all of my previous layers shine through. I've been mixing this in the same cup because I've been doing this for quite some time, but most of the time you guys are going to want to mix your paint in the middle. So just like I'm doing here in the palette, I've got one color on one side and another color on the other, and I'm mixing in the middle. That way if I get it wrong, it won't take a gallon of paint to change that color to what I need it to be. Okay, I'm pretty satisfied with this. Now it's time to wrap the handle. I've got some really nice teal colored leather here. I'm trying to match the colors of the Master Sword. I ordered this on Amazon. Now I've got to cut it into strips. For this, I'm going to use a metal square as a guide for my X-Acto knife. That way I can cut some really precise, straight strips of leather. You just want to make sure your leather's straight and that you're bearing down really good on your ruler. Also, it's a really good idea to make sure you have a very sharp knife blade for this. You just want to make sure your fingers are well away from where that blade's gonna be. We're going to adhere the leather strips down using a little CA glue, but we got to give the glue a tooth. So I'm going to score this up with my knife. Luckily for us, the original sword that we used for a master already comes with these fake little grips on them, and that marks out our path for scoring quite nicely. If it hadn't, we could always mark off the area we wanted to score by mocking up the little strip and then making a mark. Just like this. But we really don't have to worry about that. I'm just going to do a nice crisscross pattern over the entire thing. Another way you can give a surface a tooth is by using some coarse sandpaper. Now it has been good and roughed up. Now it's time for our cyanoacrylate glue. We're just going to put on a little bit at a time so it doesn't dry too fast. Normally I would use some accelerant to make the glue dry faster, but I didn't have any. And it didn't matter anyway, because for some reason this stuff dried really quick. I don't know if it was because of the leather or if it was because of the paint on the hilt of the sword. So we're just going to wrap this one layer going one way. Cut it, making sure to err on the side of caution. We want to cut too much rather than too little, if that's the case. And then we'll turn around and wrap it going the other way. We just got to angle that leather so that it makes sense. Now I have decided to put a little bit of leather trim around the top and the bottom of this. Just seems to give it better fit and finish. Now that the bulk of the sword is done, it's on to the tricky part, making this sword glow. To do that, we're going to use glow-in-the-dark blue pigments. I just want to do a few tests first so that I don't ruin the sword that I've worked so hard on. I painted a piece of paper silver and then put my pigment over the top to see how much it affected it. Then I did a dark wash on my leather to see if it was worth it to bring out those leathery textures. Now I'm charging the glow-in-the-dark pigments to see how strong the effect is after only one layer. Ooh, pretty decent. So this is how I turn those pigments into paint. I like taking baby food jars and saving those. They make great little paint containers. I poured in acrylic medium, and then I added my powder to a ratio that I thought was going to be pretty good, and ended up making my own paint. Just as simple as that. Just a binder and a pigment. I want it to be a little translucent because I want to see the silver of the sword underneath this. Now that my tests are finished, we can go ahead and start applying layers of this to our master sword. That way it glows blue in the dark. It took several layers to get the effect that I wanted.
Thank you guys for tuning in and taking interest. Sorry for how long it took me to upload, but I am really happy with the way this turned out, especially the glow. I did not expect it to look that good. There's nothing to do now but roll the glamour shots.